Welcome to part 2 of my travelogue to Scotland. I split it into 2 because I didn't want it to be too long or too overwhelming. Whether it's traveling for real or watching travelogues, at least I can't take in too much at a time. There's only 67 kilometers between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and although I'd been to Edinburgh 3 times before, I'd never been to Glasgow. I like to see new things when I go to a place I've been before, live in a new part of town, etc., so that my idea of the place expands with every visit. At the train station, a man was testing a piano or something, a thoroughly delightful welcome to Glasgow. The weather was, well, quite Scottish when we arrived, but being from Denmark, we acclimatized immediately. For years, Glasgow was known as a working-class city compared to Edinburgh, but the city has done a lot to nuance that image in recent years. One initiative is to focus a lot on art, from beautiful museums, one of which we go to later, to amazing street art. We happened to walk up the exact street where some of the most known murals were. But there are many more to explore around the city if you ever get the chance. We left the high street and headed for Glasgow Cathedral, or St Mungo's Cathedral, which is the oldest building in Glasgow and the oldest church in mainland Scotland, dating back to 1197. After a visit inside the cathedral, we headed for the cemetery next to it, known as Glasgow Necropolis. It's a Victorian cemetery placed on a hill overlooking the city, with some 3,500 monuments, and an additional 50,000 graves, many of which are unmarked. Necropolis was built in 1832, following some of the same principles of the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris, and to me it looked like something out of a movie. It's one of the most remarkable cemeteries I've ever visited, and I've visited many. At one point I saw a sign that mentioned the location of a William Wallace memorial, as in Braveheart, and I went searching for it, leaving my family behind. I couldn't find it at first, but must have looked like someone searching, because an elderly American woman saw me and asked me if I was looking for it too, which I confirmed. So we began looking together. She couldn't walk up some stairs because she'd broken her leg 2 weeks before going. What a shame, I said, but what courage you have to go on this trip anyway. And all alone, I thought. Well, she said, we don't know how many days we have left. May as well make them count. I booked this trip a year ago and I wasn't going to let a broken leg stop me. That's my kind of hero. I want to be like that when I'm 10, 20 years older. We walked back into the city centre and found the pedestrian zone, with the requisite buskers, who were remarkably good and young. My daughter was amazed that someone only a bit older than her would have the courage to stand up and sing right there in front of everyone. She went and gave one of them a couple of pounds, singing along with him for a while. We had a delicious lunch, and when we came back outside, the sun had come out. We paid a brief visit to the Gallery of Modern Art. The statue of the Duke of Wellington out in front has a traffic cone on its head. Every time the authorities have removed it, it has been replaced and is now permanently there. Scottish anti-authoritarian humor. We walked around in the gallery appreciating the art and the silence, but were feeling a bit tired by now. Before we left the city, my daughter bought a pair of sneakers, or trainers in Britain, which were £30 cheaper than in Denmark. when the shop assistant looked at me and said something to me in what sounded like a mix between Gaelic and a made-up language. I had to ask him to repeat, please. Possibly the first time in my adult life I couldn't understand a native English speaker. He wanted us to head for the counter, it appeared, a word that came out like "co" or something to that effect. In the early evening we took the train back to Waverley Station in Edinburgh, named after Sir Walter Scott's novel, and decided to take a detour back to our hotel, because it's not every day that you're surrounded by beautiful stone buildings and a medieval castle. I just never get tired of that view. We took the long way back to Princes Street and saw again a surprising number of people in shorts, something we'd seen the previous days too, despite the low temperatures, even rain. And so I must conclude that the Scottish are an especially hardy people. We also saw many more people with gorgeous red hair than we do in the same amount of time in Denmark. That is not a cliché. In the evening we went looking for some food to take back with us to the hotel, when I saw a long line of people in front of a concert hall. I couldn't believe it when I found out they were waiting to see Paul Weller in concert only moments later, an icon from my teenage years. The next morning we had a full English breakfast, and afterwards we headed once again for the castle, this time to get inside it. I had booked the trip online 2 days previously, which is the way things are apparently done now. I had seen the castle before, but my family hadn't. Although it's quite the touristy thing to do, it's also a must-see when in Edinburgh. Apart from the stunning views of the city from up there, the ambiance of the place is kind of magical. Even if there were hundreds of tourists that day, something you can't really complain about when you're there as a tourist too. Towards the end of our trip, I was beginning to feel somewhat unfulfilled, being simply a tourist. I felt like staying on, but also like joining a course, taking a class, getting a job, or something which would put me in touch with some Scots, so as to connect with the city and the country on a deeper level. But it was not to be, of course, which is the downside of traveling this way. It's life-enhancing to me to travel, and I must echo my countryman Hans Christian Andersen, who said, "To travel is to live." But it's also bittersweet, given that it must always come to an end. I at least always long for more, whilst at the same time being immensely grateful to have been away at all. We said goodbye to the castle and decided to swing by the National Museum of Scotland, which turned out to be partly closed due to renovations, something the teenager amongst us was quite pleased with. But she appreciates beautiful paintings, I think, and I could understand her sentiment at this stage. I focused on 3 or 4 paintings, feeling especially grateful to see the John Singer Sargent painting. We lounged in the Princes Street Gardens afterwards, and then we had our last meal that day. Afternoon tea at the Hotel The Scotsman, where I lived on a previous visit. We always have afternoon tea when we're in Britain. I've always felt that the best way of exploring any city, any country, insofar as it's safe to be out and about, is to walk. I appreciate that, with the right shoes, I'm still able to walk. If there comes a time when I still feel like traveling but am no longer as able to walk, I hope I'll have a traveling companion with me to lean on, the way these 2 elderly gentlemen accompanied each other down the street. So here we are on the bus to the airport, feeling sad to be leaving. Here's the girls' school again that we passed on our way into the city only 6 days before. And some final views of terraced houses and beautiful hedges, which I'll never tire of either. Bye for now, Edinburgh. Till we meet again, you've been grand. And thank you so much for coming along with me.